All right, this test over Unit 3, Cultural Patterns and Process, is going to be like just the same test that we've taken before. There's 75 multiple choice questions, and then there's one free response question. Now, today I'm not going to be going over the vocabulary matching, but that's part of your review. We did that at the beginning of the unit. Make sure you get that out. If you've lost it, make sure you get on the classroom website and pull that off and look over those as well. But that's the key vocabulary that you need to know in regards to this test. What we're going to go over in this review is just open-ended questions like normal, but then you're not going to see the FRQ at the end. What I did is I've embedded the FRQ within the questions, so when you come, if you study the review, you'll know what you're doing. If you haven't studied the review, then you might have trouble because this FRQ can be tricky if you didn't look at all these questions. So just make sure you study these open-ended questions, and if you do have questions over these questions, make sure that you email me and ask me, but it should be a fairly simple test. I'm expecting the averages to just continually go up and up. All right, question number 1. You'll notice that I've divided this up based on your curriculum, and the first area in our curriculum on Unit 3 that we're covering is the concepts of culture, and then the first subsection of the concepts of culture that we're looking at is the culture traits. Now what I've done is I've put letters like letter A to represent the different questions. Letter A says define cultural ecology and explain how it is different from environmental determinism. Cultural ecology is a holistic approach to studying the relationship between a human society and its natural environment. So it's an area of focus when in regards to studying. In our aspect of cultural geography, the reason that we're looking at it is that it's looking at how cultures are different based on their relationship with their natural environment of where they are geographically. Now, environmental determinism says that geographic factors shape a people's culture, that these factors are actually changing and modifying a culture. Cultural ecology is just looking at how different geographic areas, based on their geography and based on their environment, how they can be different. And environmental determinism is the theory that says the environments can determine a culture. In other words, it can change and modify it. Letter B, what is the difference between multiculturalism and ethnocentrism? Ethnocentrism is the habit of evaluating other people's cultures, customs, beliefs, and practices according to the limited perspective of one's own culture. So basically you're judging another people's culture in ethnocentrism. In multiculturalism, this describes a cultural attitude that is most similar to cosmopolitan. What I mean by that is it's very diverse. It does adapt, it does change. It looks at all of these cultures that are available, and then it changes their culture and blends it. With ethnocentrism, you don't have a blending because you're thinking, my culture is the best. Letter C, which of the following would be cultural dominance from forceful control? Acculturation or cultural imperialism, and then why? This would be cultural imperialism. Remember, cultural imperialism is looking at kind of colonism, when countries colonized other areas, and then as they colonized these areas, the lesser culture became dominated because of this forceful control. And acculturation is when certain aspects of the adopted culture are still kept. So acculturation could take place within cultural imperialism, meaning on one small scale, maybe the host culture kept their own. Like in Latin America, when Spain came over and colonized the area and brought Roman Catholicism, cultural imperialism took over because Roman Catholicism was forced on this less dominant culture. But then acculturation, you could look at maybe the types of foods that were being created because of the use of spices and those things, which are found in Mexico and in some of these Latin American countries. So acculturation stayed, or it took place with the food. All right, number 2, we're still in the curriculum A of concepts of culture, but we're looking at migration patterns, or diffusion patterns, I'm sorry. Letter A says, migration in the United States has predominantly went which direction? And the answer is from the east to the west. The reason the migration goes from the east to the west is the United States is colonized in the east, and then as time goes on and as technology catches up, we start migrating west to California and in those areas on the western coast. B, define expansion diffusion, hierarchical diffusion, stimulus diffusion, relocation diffusion, and contagious diffusion, and give an example of each. Expansion diffusion is when a culture expands or spreads within a region or all over the world. And an example of that would be like the Mormon Church expanding and going into other parts of the United States and taking over other counties and moving towards the west. Hierarchical diffusion is when people groups move or when certain concepts move to certain areas. Remember, this is the one where just because you're in the immediate area does not mean you're going to be affected. There's kind of a rule or a pattern as to how this diffusion spreads. And an example in regards to culture would kind of be like fashion trends. They spread among certain peoples, but not everybody in the immediate area uses that. An example of everybody in the immediate area being affected would be contagious diffusion. That's when everybody is affected. And you can look at the spread of diseases being contagious diffusion, but it doesn't have to be. Another is stimulus diffusion. This is when a certain aspect of that culture spreads and not the whole thing. For example, when Apple stole some of the ideas that Android had already been using, such as the iWatch, which Android already had their version of that. The next is relocation diffusion. This is when you actually relocate and you move. An example of that would be like the Sikh religion in the United States, or maybe even if you saw Hindu temples in the United States. The reason that would be a relocation diffusion is because Hinduism did not begin and is not predominantly found in the United States. And so the fact that you can find Hindu temples in the United States shows you that these people have relocated. Letter C, what term defines the blending of Native American, African, and European cultures in Latin America? This is called Creole. You spell it C-R-E-O-L-E. Creole is this culture that's found in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, and it's a mix of Native American culture, which came from the a mix of the African American culture, which came from Africa with slavery, the Native American culture, which was already there, and then the European nation that colonized that area, which predominantly was Spain. So it's a blending of all these different cultures, and that's called Creole. The next concept that we're looking at, or number, is number 3. Number 3 is still letter A, but it's the third and fourth subsection. Third says acculturation, assimilation, and multiculturalism. The question that I have from this is, what is the difference between enclave and exclave? Remember, an enclave is when a certain cultural region is surrounded. So a certain cultural group is surrounded culturally by another. And what you're predominantly going to see in an enclave is you're going to see that culture starting to shrink if it is totally surrounded by the other, because you're going to start seeing acculturation take over. An exclave is mainly found in the political unit of the curriculum, but an exclave is talking about when a physical land is surrounded by a foreign land. So when one country or a part of a country is totally surrounded by a whole other country. Just fit exclave with political geography and enclave with cultural geography. Number 4, cultural region, vernacular region, and cultural hearth. Question is, what area of Canada is predominantly French? Is this an example of an enclave or an exclave? Your answer is Quebec. The province of Quebec is the area of Canada that's predominantly French. Now, this is a good question, whether it being enclave or exclave. If you're taking the literal definition, it would have to be an enclave, because you've got the French culture that's totally surrounded by the other culture. But the province of Quebec is seeking independence because they feel like that they are actually an exclave, that they're total different people that's surrounded by another country. But right now, officially, Quebec is a province of Canada. so it is not a separate country. Now, there are separatist movements in Quebec that's wanting to separate and create their own country. If they do create their own country, then it would be an example of an exclave. Now, also on the French topic, it's not in your review, but remember, a lot of the United States was controlled by the French. Areas of Louisiana Purchase, that area of the United States had a huge French culture before it was bought out. All right, number 4. Number 4 is section B of your curriculum. It is the cultural differences and regional patterns. First subsection of letter B that we're going to be looking at is language. Now, this language section is very important. A says, what is the difference between a cultural trait and a cultural complex? And then where does dialect fit? So would a dialect be cultural trait or cultural complex? Now, remember, a cultural trait is a certain aspect of that culture, a certain specific characteristic of that culture. A cultural complex is when you put all of these traits together. Now, I think, this is kind of a subjective question, but a dialect I would think would fit more into a cultural trait because you're looking at a certain aspect of that language. So when you put the dialect and then the language and into the language branch and the language branch into the language family, then we're looking at a cultural complex. But since dialect is a specific aspect, I would consider it a cultural trait. B, would a pidgin language be a dialect? Remember that a pidgin language is a highly simplified version of the entire language that can be spoken across different dialects. And because of this, I would say no, a pidgin language could not be a dialect because it's just a simplified version that many different dialects can speak. So it's not really a dialect of its own. Letter C. What language family do the following languages fit in? English, Arabic, and Mandarin. English would fit in your Indo-European language and would be part of the Germanic branch. Arabic would fit into the Afro-Asiatic language family. Now, if you're looking at these on the test and you're trying to figure out where they fit, just look at the root words. Afro-Asiatic. So I know that it's part of Africa, part of Asia. A mix of those would be like the Middle East, which Arabic is spoken in the Middle East. All right? All else fails, use that thinker that's between your ears. Then Mandarin Chinese would fit into the Sino-Tibetan language family. Remember, the Indo-European and Sino-Tibetan language family are the ones that have the most people in them, and Mandarin Chinese is the most widely or most commonly spoken language in the world. Language family, it's still going to fit Indo-European, close second being Sino-Tibetan, but the actual language would be Mandarin Chinese. All right, letter D. What is the difference between an isolate and an isogloss? An isolate is a language that is totally surrounded by other languages. An isogloss is a dialect that has a geographical reach. So the isogloss is the reach of a certain dialect, a certain word usage. And the isolate is when you're isolated, the language is, and it's totally surrounded by others. And generally when you have an isolate as a language, it's going to start to die out because it's not spreading and it's just shrinking, it's contracting. Isogloss, again, is the geographic area that a dialect reaches. Letter E. What is a speech community? A speech community is the concept that specifically refers to a group of people who will speak a common language or a dialect. A speech community is not a language family because it's still specific to a dialect or a common language. Again, speech community is the concept that specifically refers to a group of people who will speak a common language or common dialect. It's not a language family because it is still specific to a dialect or common language. I'm sure you've flipped your page by now and you're looking at number 5 and you're flipping your lid. There's a lot of questions on here and I understand that, but the religion section is very, 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 very important. I have not seen a whole lot of FRQs about the religious section on your AP exam, so basically what that means is it's coming. I have seen one, but I think there's probably going to be another one on this AP exam. Now, number 5. Letter B, cultural differences, racial patterns, the subheading of religion. Letter A says, what is animism and what is its sacred place? Remember that animism is the belief that things in nature have spirits, such as trees, plants, animals, all of those different things have their own spirits, and so you should treat them with respect because of it. Animism is what was worshipped by Native Americans in the United States, and a lot of sub-Saharan Africa right now, these tribal regions, they practice animism as well. Its sacred place would be Ayers Rock. Now, if you have a list of these and you're trying to figure out what animism's sacred place would be, look at the ones that's dealing with the environment. Rock, a rock is in the environment. Again, use that thinker. Letter B, what is proselytism and what religion best reflects it? Proselytism is the idea that your religion is wanting to convert people to your own. Christianity is the most closely associated with proselytism because part of the idea of Christianity is to go out and make disciples and to spread the movement that Jesus started. Letter C, what is Islam? What is its sacred place? How does the Sharia law fit in? What is the jihad? Are there any branches or denominations? A lot of questions here. First off, Islam is a monotheistic faith that believes in Allah and that their prophet's name was Muhammad, and that Angel Gabriel came down and gave the word to Muhammad of how things were going to go within the world. It is a religion that is growing. In this religion, there is what's known as the 5 pillars. Part of these 5 pillars is fasting during Ramadan, the giving of alms, so the paying the charity, taking the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca if you're able to do it, praying 5 times a day facing Mecca, and then your declaration of faith basically saying that Muhammad is the prophet and Allah is the only God. Now the next part of that question says, what is its sacred place? I just covered that with the Hajj, that is in Mecca. How does the Sharia law fit into this? The Sharia law is the law code and law system that's associated directly with Islam. It's a law code that they must follow, and it's a law code that has a lot of cultural aspects within it. The Quran is their holy book, don't forget that. Then it says, what is the jihad? The jihad is the sacred struggle to defend the faith. Basically, this is the idea where the radical fundamentalists take and say that we're supposed to go out and violently defend Islam. Not all Islamic people are Muslims. Not all of those take a violent approach to the jihad. But the jihad is the idea that you will defend your faith if it comes down to it. Next question says, are there any branches or denominations? And yes, there are. The 2 major branches and denominations are the Sunni Muslims and the Shiite Muslims, but you've also got Sufism, the Sufan branch, and you've also got a Quranism branch of Islam. The 2 main ones are Sunni and Shiite. Sunni is the biggest branch, and then Shiite, predominantly this is located in Iran. Again, Sunni is the biggest branch of Islam, and the Shiites predominantly found in Iran. Now, letter D. Let me read it to you. Buddhism has reincarnation with nirvana. What does that mean? This is not the rock band Nirvana that we're talking about. Buddhism has reincarnation, which is talking about how when you die, depending on how you are, you will come back as something else. But what makes Buddhism different in regards to reincarnation is that they have nirvana, where you can eventually get out of this endless cycle of reincarnation and you can make it into an eternal peace. Again, make sure you understand that nirvana, not the rock band, is associated with Buddhism. Letter E, if given a map of the United States, make sure you can label the area where Lutheranism is, where the Amish are located, where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons, are located, and then where Baptists and Methodists are. Now, looking at the map here, you can see the upper Midwest is where you're going to find Lutheranism. The Amish you could find in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Remember that folk religion. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons, you can find in the western parts of the United States, predominantly around Utah. Baptists, looking at the southern area of the United States. And then Methodists above the Baptists. Now, this map is a county-by-county look based on census data that was given, so it might not be 100% accurate, but the scale is looking at counties. Letter F. What are Hinduism's main components? How does Hinduism have reincarnation? Like, what makes Hinduism's reincarnation different from other religions? Number one, make sure you understand that Hinduism is a highly, highly polytheistic religion. They hold the Ganges River to be a sacred place. They believe that the Ganges River purifies everything that's in it. They believe in reincarnation through the caste system. It's a social class that you can move up and down in. You've got the untouchables, which are out of the caste system. And then the top area is the priestly class. But make sure you understand, number one, that the caste system is a social class dealing with when you die, depending on how you were, you'll move up or down in this caste. And the idea is to all reach the priestly caste, and that this is how they do reincarnation. Letter G. What religions say that Jerusalem is their holy place? These are your three predominant monotheistic faiths of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Number 6, there's not a whole lot of questions in this section. The reason being is there hasn't been a whole lot asked on the AP exam release test, so I pulled the ones that I could find. Still in letter B, we're looking at pop and folk culture. The question that I got from this is, what is the difference between popular and folk culture? Remember that popular culture is a modern culture. You could kind of characterize it as being cosmopolitan, meaning a lot of people in cities, very diverse. Remember that it diffuses very rapidly, and it's quite contagious. It'll spread very quickly. On the flip side, folk culture is your old type of culture. It's more homogeneous, meaning it's mainly what traditional parts of that place worship, not necessarily worship, but take part in. And it doesn't diffuse very rapidly, and it's not very contagious because it's things of the past. Now, number 6, deal with conflicts. Letter B, where is there fighting between the Hindu and Muslim populations of a country? I put the country, but of what country? Now, when you're thinking about Muslim population, remember we're looking at the Middle East. We're thinking about Hindus, predominantly found in India. So it's where these two are mixing. This is the northern area of India. It's called the Kashmir region, Kashmir. This is the area where you find a lot of Sikhs. But it's also the area where people living in India come into contact with each other in regards to Hinduism and Muslim people. So there's a lot of fighting in this area. Letter C, what was white flight? White flight was a racial issue. There's a lot of things involved with that. Part of that was where white people were leaving areas and selling their houses for cheap because the real estate agent said that it was going to be worth nothing. Also, there was urban restructuring that was going on as black people were moving out of the ghetto after slavery ended. You also have urban decay taking place as parts of a city become areas where predominantly the poor people live. Also, redlining takes place during the white flight. What redlining is talking about is when there are racial discriminatory practices taking place to where they might not buy or sell a land based on the race of the people who owned that land or that house. Number 7, moving on to another section of your curriculum, looking at the cultural landscapes and cultural identity. The number we're looking at here is symbolic landscapes and sense of place. Letter A, what is a secular landscape? A secular landscape is a landscape that has absolutely nothing to do with religion. Remember, predominantly throughout the world, most of society is becoming more and more secular, meaning kind of the world and not necessarily partaking in any specific religion. You're becoming less and less religious and relying more and more on science and those things. But a secular landscape is any landscape that does not have to do with anything with the religion, such as the Great Wall of China. Absolutely nothing to do with the religion of an area. Letter B, what is a landscape of consumption? When you think of consumption, remember you're thinking about eating. You're buying things, consuming things. In regards to capitalism, this is the aspect where things are being sold because people are buying them. It's not necessarily a business district of a place, It's more looking at a specific landscape that deals with selling things specifically, like a theme park. That's the example that I used in the notes. A theme park is totally revolving around the idea of having consumers or having people buy things. Letter C, what is a cultural landscape? A cultural landscape is the forms that are superimposed on the physical environment by human activities. Forms that are superimposed on the physical environment by human activities. So it's what you can see in regards to the landscape or the layout of an area based on their culture. Architectural forms reflect this. Certain areas in the Southwest reflect kind of adobe houses, rounded buildings, because it's reflecting that culture. So cultural landscape, you can actually see parts of the culture on the landscape itself. Letter D, define formal, functional, and vernacular cultural regions. A formal cultural region is a geographical area defined by homogeneous cultural traits, which are shared traits. Remember, this is an area that a formal region is one that has shared characteristics, such as languages, dialects, religious beliefs, maybe ethnic identities, or political affiliations. These are all shared traits within a region. Examples, because I'm looking for examples of these. Examples of a formal region would be like the United States and Mexico border. Maybe because of this would be a formal region because you could see the Spanish language and the religion, shared religion of Catholic religion. A functional region, remember this is like your nodal region. It has a common function. Generally you can see a central point surrounded somehow by the other areas. My favorite example of all time is Pizza Hut delivery maps, because you have the Pizza Hut and then you have the connected area that they will deliver to. A vernacular region, this is a subjective area based loosely defined characteristics according to attitudes, beliefs, or stereotypes about a place. This is like Dixie in the Deep South. It's like that area. It's the same thing as a perceptual cultural region. It's just based off of opinions and ideas. Letter E, what is an advantage and a drawback of all three? Looking at formal region, an advantage of a formal cultural region would be that it allows geographers to measure the geographical domain or extent of specific cultural traits or complexes. In other words, geographers can look and identify geographically where specific elements of a culture are. A drawback is sometimes these boundaries can rarely be traced absolutely, meaning it's hard to actually pinpoint exactly where these cultural regions are or where these shared characteristics actually are. Functional cultural region. Out of a functional cultural region, an advantage of this would be the limits and boundaries can be defined where the borders end. You can see where they are on a functional cultural region because you're looking at an area that has a shared function, that has a nodal region. A drawback from this is that it yields little information about cultural patterns because it's focusing primarily on a certain function or certain system. So cultural patterns in general you can't reach because it's looking specifically at a certain function or pattern. That's what makes it a region. And then vernacular. An advantage of a vernacular cultural region is it recognizes popular regional identities that already exist in an area because you're looking at attitudes about a place. And then drawback is there's really no objective way to measure where a vernacular cultural region is because it's all based on beliefs and ideas and attitudes of a place. And then last but not least, number 8. Still on letter C, we're looking at the formation and identity of place. What is topophilia and what is a toponym? Topophilia is the love of a place. It's the certain belief about a place that you love it. And a toponym is the name given to a place. B, what concept best emphasizes how landscapes are meditated by perceptual biases, social values, and cultural beliefs? In other words, you're looking at how people on their mental map can think about a place based on their biases, social values, and cultural beliefs. The idea, and this is a very subjective look, but I want to make sure you understand it, the key word here is representation. Representation is the concept that best emphasizes how landscapes are mediated by perceptual biases, social values, and cultural beliefs. So you're looking at how landscapes are represented based upon the biases about the place, social values in the place, and cultural values of a place. And I know that kind of can seem confusing, but it's a broad concept that covers this area. Letter C, what is a diurnal climate and what folk architecture best fits in a diurnal climate? A diurnal climate is one that has extreme weather shifts, like in the southwestern parts of the United States, close to Mexico. Now, you find adobe houses in these areas predominantly because in adobe houses, they can fit within these diurnal climates, and you can also find this type of mud, this adobe. You can find this in the area, so it will fit this diurnal climate well. Letter D, what is an example of vernacular housing during early America? So we're looking at like the 1900s, kind of what is an example of a vernacular housing? Remember, vernacular housing is one that's specific to a culture. It kind of represents their lifestyle. The example I'm looking for here is the dog trot house, the one that has a breezeway in the middle where people can hang out. It represents the area and the people because they don't have air conditioning, and this is kind of a way of cooling the house. You have this open area in the middle, this breezeway that allows the breeze to go through that can then cool off the other parts of the house. And it kind of gives you separation between two maybe people groups because you had large families living together during this time period, and it's almost like two separate houses. And then letter E, this is dealing with the indigenous peoples of the area. Why was Nunavut created? Nunavut, which is a territory of Canada, was created and separated from the rest of Canada because they wanted to group the indigenous people together and leave them alone. The indigenous peoples of this area are kind of your Eskimo-type people, the nomadic peoples that came from Asia that stayed, and the government of Canada has kind of grouped Nunavut together as a territory and kind of left it alone and left the indigenous peoples to themselves. Now, you got to take into mind, this is a northern part of Canada. It's extremely cold. You don't have high populations anyways, so Canada's like, you know what, we'll give you your own land.